Hi, my name is Amy. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to show you how I made a pair of woolen mitts using the pattern from Penny River Costumes. I will link her up above here. Recently, our daughter needed to be quarantined after having a COVID test before a medical procedure. But Todd wasn't able to quarantine because he had some conflicts at work and he needed to be able to go into the office. So Harley and I lived out here in my sewing space, and I came up with some projects that I could do that didn't involve me having to sit at my desk or at the sewing machine, because I also am working out here since I'm still working from home. I wanted to have a change of scenery, as you will. I used an ivory wool from fabric.com, and I embroidered the back of the hand part of the mitts, and I will show you how I did that and constructed them. So with that, let's get sewing. I reviewed the pattern instructions just to make sure I was familiar with the assembly process. I knew from making them the last time that I needed to add about 2 inches to the diameter of the mitts at the upper forearm section. So I traced around the pattern piece originally, and then I added 1 inch to each side. And I used that cut piece to cut the other arm. When I cut the second arm, I made sure to place the pieces right sides together so that I had mirror images and 2 separate hands when I finished the mitts. I also cut out the thumb pieces, but I did not cut out the pieces for the lining until I had the mitts hemmed. After choosing an embroidery pattern, I used one of my clear quilter's rulers to determine the place where I wanted to have the embroidery on the back of the mitt. I marked that out on the first mitt and then copied the pattern to the second mitt. I drew the pattern on the mitts using a water-soluble marker, just so that the pattern would be easy to remove once the embroidery was finished. Fun fact about this project, you can see I'm sitting on a quilt. This was my bed while Harley and I were in quarantine. We did have a queen-sized air mattress in here, but she likes to take up the whole mattress, and our couch is actually pretty comfortable, so I didn't mind sleeping on it. I started the embroidery with a blue chain stitch on each of the straight lines. There's 3 lines on each mitt. This was a new stitch for me. I've done the reverse chain stitch, but not an actual chain stitch before, so it was a fun one to learn. Untangling threads is always. I was actually really pleasantly surprised at how quickly I was able to learn and make the chain stitch. And you can see on the back side a nice straight stitch and the chain stitch on the front. The stem stitch is another stitch I've never used before, and it actually was surprisingly easy as well. There are 2 lengths of stem stitch on each mitt for the stems of the flowers, thus the stem stitch, and those went really quickly as well. As I was stitching, I made sure to complete each color before switching to the next color. So I did all 3 of the blue chain stitches on one mitt and then on the second mitt, and then I did both stems on one mitt and the second mitt, and so on. I am not the cleanest or best stitcher yet as far as embroidery goes, but I'm really pleasantly surprised at how well these turned out, since I had never done a stem stitch before. Next up were the leaves, and the satin stitch is the bane of my existence. I can never get it to work well I always end up having loose threads no matter what I do, but I am going to continue to do it, and I am going to continue practicing. These turned out well enough for my purpose. Now we're on to the center of the flowers. More satin stitch, but these are small circles, and they both turned out really well on both mitts. I didn't record the yellow satin stitches that are part of the flowers because it's just more satin stitching. But the base of each of the blue lines has a bundle of French knots, so I went ahead and recorded those. I'm still learning French knots. I have done them several times, and I do have to say that these are probably the best ones that I've ever made. They turned out really well. I didn't have too many extra loops of fabric or thread, and I'm really pleased with the results. I made a total of 7 knots at the base of each of the chain stitch lines. The lighting is horrible in this clip because I was working on this while waiting for Harley during her first procedure, and it's just more satin stitching, this time for the petals of the flowers. And now we're back home, and I am finishing up the flower petals. The first step in constructing these mitts is to hem the top of the thumb piece and the top and bottom edges of the mitt pieces. I did that by folding over the edges about 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch and using a small whip stitch to secure it down. The pattern does indicate to roll this over and do it as a double folded hem, but this fabric was just a little bit too bulky for that, and I didn't like the way it looked. While I was working on these hems, I was really careful to only pick up a thread or two from the right side of the fabric to keep my stitches as invisible as possible, since I did not do the double fold hem. Pip loved having us in quarantine because that meant she got to spend 24 hours a day with her two favorite people. And she alternated going back and forth between Harley's lap and my lap the entire week. After I had the top edge of the mitts hemmed, I used that top line as a guideline to trace the pattern onto the silk I used as the tip lining, and then I cut it out along that line, folded over the edges, and pinned it onto the inside of the mitt. And then I used a very, very tiny whip stitch to attach the lining to the mitt. I am really proud of these stitches. I think they are probably by far the smallest stitches I've ever made, and none of them are visible from the right side of the fabric, which makes me really happy. The lining turned out really nice on both mitts, and I'm very pleased with how it looks. The first step in attaching the thumb piece is to cut out the kidney-shaped piece that I drew using the pattern piece. Now here I'm cutting about 1/4 inch away from the edge because I wanted to have some extra fabric in there for manipulating the thumb piece. This does get trimmed down later on once the thumb is completely attached before I fell down that seam. The other thing I did after I hemmed the thumb piece was use a really strong back stitch to sew it together right sides together. And then to attach the thumb piece, you slip it on over your thumb with the mitt on your hand and pin it in place from the right side. These pins are kind of a basting process just to get the thumb piece in place and set correctly. Once you're done pinning the thumb piece in place, you take it off and then gradually work your way around the thumb piece, folding under the raw edge and pinning it in place more securely. I used a small slip stitch to attach the thumb piece to the mitt, and I used a strong silk sewing thread from Burnley and Trowbridge to do all of the construction and sewing on the mitts. I used silk embroidery thread from DeVere Yarns for the embroidery piece. One of the things that Harley and I did while we were in quarantine was have a couple movie marathons. J.K. Rowling is a garbage human being, but Harley and I love the Harry Potter movies. So we watched all 8 of those, and then we watched the 3 Hobbit movies, and then the Lord of the Rings trilogy. It was a good week for movie watching. With the thumb piece securely in place, I turned the mitt over and I cut all of those extra edges and seam allowance from the thumb piece and what I didn't cut off of the mitt piece originally. I used very small whip stitches to fell down the seams for the thumb piece. Pinning the side seam of this mitt is the most difficult part of this project because you have to put the mitt on inside out and then pin it as close as you can to your arm, leaving a little bit of ease for pulling it off and on. It's really difficult to do one-handed, but I actually kind of managed to get it done without help. Once it was pinned, I used a pencil to mark the stitching line just so I had something to follow other than the pins. After I had a nice stitching line to follow, I repinned the mitt and got ready to sew the side seam. The side seam of the mitt is sewn together using a very tiny back stitch at the top. I actually made more of like a bar tack at the top just to take the extra strain that might be on that part of the seam. And then I used a back stitch the rest of the way along the seam edge. Once the mitts were completely constructed, I did wash them in cold water using Woolite just to get rid of any of the pencil marks, dirt from my hands from sewing them, and the water-soluble marker I used to mark out the embroidery pattern. Once the side seam was sewn, Pip decided she needed to be in my lap while I felled down that seam. And I didn't fell it the traditional way. I split the seam open down the middle and felled each side individually using a tiny whip stitch. The pattern recommends leaving the top 1 inch or so of the mitts open, which I did, but I also added a bar tack at this spot just to protect the side seam from the strain of putting the mitts on and off. I repeated all of these processes on the other mitt, and with that, they were both finished. The mitts were not the only project I completed while Harley and I were staying out here. The first thing I did was add the binding to the second pocket that my sister embroidered for me, because I only managed to get one of them finished before I published that video. So I finished this pocket first. This was the first quarantine project. And it feels really nice to get that done. I don't like having UFOs, so having that done and off my list is great. The second thing I made was a project bag following the Burnley and Trowbridge mini tutorial or mini project on their YouTube channel. I'll link that as well. And this one is made out of checked linen and lined with plain white linen. Both of these are from Burnley and Trowbridge. And I found this really handy because I can put my smaller sewing items in this when I go somewhere, and that way they don't get all tangled up or lost with the other items in my bag. The third project I finished is another work bag, but I actually started this one on Super Bowl Sunday, and I started embroidering my initial on it, and I hadn't finished that. So I finished the embroidery, and then I assembled the project bag. This bag is made out of a sand-colored silk from Fabric Mart Fabrics. I hope you enjoyed this video. Now go out and make your own 18th century mitts. They really are easier than they look. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you want to see more from me, subscribe. If you hit the little bell, YouTube will let you know every time I upload. I also have a Ko-fi account if you would like to support this channel further. Thanks for watching.